The morning started like any other, but for the man sitting quietly in the corner booth, it was the beginning of something he had never done before. He was the owner of one of the biggest restaurant chains in the city, a man known for his calm confidence and sharp business mind. Yet today, dressed in plain clothes, he looked like an average middle-aged man searching for work. His plan was simple but bold. He wanted to go undercover and see what really happened inside his restaurant when no one knew who he was. He had heard reports that one of his busiest branches wasn't performing as well as before. Customers had complained about slow service, and a few loyal guests said the place had lost its warmth. He couldn't ignore that, but instead of calling meetings or sending managers, he decided to experience it himself. He wanted to feel what his employees felt, understand their challenges, and find out why the heart of his restaurant seemed to be fading. He introduced himself to the manager as a man looking for a job as a trainee waiter. The manager, unaware of his real identity, looked him up and down and said they could use an extra pair of hands. Within an hour, he was wearing the restaurant's uniform, black shirt, apron, name tag, and standing near the kitchen door waiting for instructions. It felt strange. He had built this place from scratch years ago. He knew every recipe, every menu item, every smell that came from the kitchen. But now, standing there with a tray in his hand, nobody looked at him as the boss. He was just another worker trying to make ends meet. The first few hours were rough. He spilled a drink on a table, forgot an order, and almost dropped a plate of hot soup. The other staff laughed a little, not out of meanness, but in that light-hearted way coworkers do, when a new person is still learning. The manager told him to relax and keep up the pace. He realized that this job was not easy. Standing for hours, dealing with customers, running back and forth from kitchen to tables, it took real effort. Among the waiters and waitresses, one young woman stood out. She wasn't loud or attention-seeking. In fact, she was quiet most of the time, but her presence had something comforting about it. She moved quickly, always smiling politely, even when customers were rude or impatient. While others took short breaks to chat, she kept working, cleaning tables, refilling glasses, helping the kitchen staff. Every time someone needed help, she was there without being asked. He watched her for days, and his curiosity grew stronger. There was something different about her. She wore the same uniform as everyone else, but her shoes were old and slightly torn. Her eyes often looked tired, yet her smile never faded. When lunch rushes ended, she sat alone at a corner table, pretending to check her phone or write something in a small notebook, but she never ordered food for herself. Sometimes she drank only water, saying she wasn't hungry. By the end of his first week, he began to respect the workers in a way he never had before. The physical exhaustion was real. His feet ached, his back hurt, and he realized how much effort went unseen by customers. He had spent years in offices and boardrooms talking about efficiency and customer experience, but now he could feel what those words truly meant. Every night, after the restaurant closed, he stayed a bit longer to help clean up. He noticed that the same young waitress stayed too. When everyone else left, she quietly wiped tables, stacked chairs, and sometimes mopped the floor, even though that wasn't her job. It was around this time that something unusual caught his eye. One evening, as he was emptying a trash bin near the kitchen, he saw her standing near the bread counter. The lights were dim. Most of the kitchen was already closed. She looked around carefully, opened her purse, and slipped a few leftover bread rolls inside. His first reaction was surprise. He didn't expect that from her. For a moment, he wondered if she was stealing food to sell outside. But she didn't take much, just a few small rolls that would have been thrown away anyway. He said nothing and pretended not to see. Maybe she was hungry, he thought. But then he remembered how she always said she wasn't hungry during breaks. So if she wasn't eating them herself, who were they for? The next day, he couldn't help but watch her more closely. She worked even harder than usual, serving tables, carrying heavy trays, and staying cheerful through the busiest lunch hour. When he offered to help her carry dishes, she smiled and said, "Thank you, but I'm used to it." Her voice was soft and kind, and her hands moved quickly, almost gracefully. After the restaurant closed, she did the same thing again, checking around, waiting for others to leave, then quietly putting a few leftover bread pieces in her purse. This time he decided to follow her after work. He felt nervous, like he was invading her privacy, but his curiosity was stronger. He needed to understand her story. She walked fast through the dark streets, her shoulders slightly bent from tiredness. The neighborhood grew quieter and poorer with every block. Old houses, dim streetlights, and stray cats filled the narrow roads. Finally, she entered a small building that looked like it hadn't been painted in years. He stopped across the street, unsure what to do. He couldn't just knock on her door and ask why she took bread. That would ruin everything. So he waited for a few minutes, watching through the window as the lights came on inside. Through the thin curtains, he saw her kneel beside a small table. A little boy ran to her and hugged her tightly. She smiled, handed him the bread, and patted his head. An elderly woman appeared in the background, sitting on a worn-out chair wrapped in a blanket. The waitress kissed the woman's hand gently before giving her a piece of bread, too. The sight hit him deeply. It wasn't about stealing at all, it was about love and survival. He quietly stepped back into the shadows, his heart heavy. He had spent years calculating profits, cutting costs, talking about margins and performance. But here, in front of him, was the real meaning of struggle. This young woman, who worked in his restaurant every day, was carrying the weight of her family alone. And she never once complained. She smiled through it all. The next morning at work, he looked at her differently. Every time she smiled at a customer or helped a coworker, he felt a mix of pride and guilt. He wondered how many people like her worked for him, unseen and unheard, doing their best just to survive another day. He wanted to help her, but he didn't want to reveal his identity yet. He needed to understand her completely before stepping in. Later that week, a small accident happened during lunch service. A customer got upset because his order was late. He raised his voice and demanded to see the manager. The Undercover CEO, standing nearby, felt his heart race. He hated seeing his employees treated unfairly. Before the manager could arrive, the waitress stepped forward and calmly apologized. She offered the man a free dessert and handled the situation with such kindness that the customer's anger melted away. Watching her handle it with grace and patience made him realize she had a natural gift for leading people. That night, when the restaurant finally closed, he stayed behind again. He walked over to her and said softly, "You handled that customer really well today." She smiled shyly, brushing a loose strand of hair behind her ear. "Thank you. I just try to make people happy," she said. Then she added with a small laugh, "It's easier to smile than to argue." He nodded, pretending to wipe a table to hide his emotions. There was something about her that made him feel humble. He wanted to ask her about her life, her family, everything, but he didn't want to make her uncomfortable. So he simply said, "You're one of the hardest working people I've met." She smiled again and said, "Work keeps me going. It's not easy, but we all have reasons to keep moving, right?" Her words stayed with him long after he left that night. He couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about how many times he had looked at numbers and forgotten the faces behind them. For years he had believed that success was about efficiency, growth, and reputation. But now, sitting alone in his apartment, he realized success meant nothing if he didn't understand the people who made it possible. He looked around at his home filled with everything money could buy: expensive art, fine furniture, a view of the city lights. Yet in that moment he felt strangely empty. Somewhere in that tiny apartment across town, a young woman was feeding her family with leftover bread, smiling despite everything. And here he was, a man with everything, feeling like he had nothing that truly mattered. He didn't know it yet, but this experience would change his life forever. What started as a business inspection was slowly turning into something deeper. A journey that would open his eyes to the real world, to kindness, to struggle, and to love in its purest form. The next few days passed quietly inside the restaurant, but his mind couldn't rest. Every time he saw the young waitress walking from table to table with her calm smile, he thought of that small apartment, the little boy, and the old woman waiting for her at home. The picture replayed in his head like a movie. It wasn't pity he felt. It was something deeper, something that made him want to understand her world better. He decided not to interfere. Not yet. He wanted to keep watching, learning. Every day he noticed small things about her. The way she helped the cook when he was short on hands. The way she folded napkins neatly, even when no one was watching. The way she quietly gave her own tips to a coworker who needed bus fare. She had a kindness that didn't ask for attention. It was the kind of goodness that came naturally, like breathing. One afternoon, a heavy rainstorm started just as the lunch rush ended. Customers rushed out under umbrellas, and the workers began cleaning up the wet floor near the entrance. She was the only one who didn't complain about staying late. When the last customer left, She grabbed a towel and started wiping the tables near the window. The undercover CEO, standing nearby, watched her for a moment and then joined in. "You don't have to do that," she said softly, surprised to see the new trainee helping her. "I don't mind," he replied with a small smile. "You work harder than anyone else here. I should learn from you." She gave a quiet laugh and said, "Hard work keeps me focused. When I'm busy, I don't think too much." He didn't ask what she meant, but he could tell there were things on her mind that she never shared. Something about the way she stared out the window sometimes, like she was somewhere far away, remembering another life. Later that evening, when the staff was about to leave, he saw her once again slip the same small purse over her shoulder. He watched as she carefully wrapped a few leftover bread rolls in a napkin and tucked them inside, just like before. It wasn't much, just 2 or 3 small pieces, but the way she handled them as if they were precious broke something inside him. That night, he followed her again. He told himself it wasn't spying. He just wanted to understand. The rain had stopped, but the streets were still wet. She walked quickly, holding her small umbrella close. He stayed far enough not to be noticed. The route was the same. Quiet streets, broken streetlights, stray dogs looking for shelter. When she reached her building, she paused before going in. For a moment, she just stood there, taking a deep breath as if preparing herself to smile again. From the window, he saw her light turn on. The same boy ran to greet her, and she lifted him up with tired arms kissing his forehead. The old woman was sitting on the couch this time, a blanket over her knees. The waitress placed the bread on the table and poured water into 3 small cups. They laughed softly as they shared the simple meal, breaking the bread carefully so everyone got a fair piece. He watched from across the street with a heavy heart. It wasn't about food, it was about love. It was about a daughter trying to hold her family together, one small piece of bread at a time. He turned away before they could see him. The walk back to his apartment felt longer that night. The city lights looked different now, colder, emptier. The next morning, when he entered the restaurant, the smell of fresh coffee and baked bread filled the air. The manager greeted everyone and gave quick instructions. The undercover CEO tied his apron and began setting tables, but his eyes kept drifting toward her. She looked cheerful, chatting lightly with a coworker, but her eyes had that same quiet tiredness. During the breakfast rush, an elderly customer called her over, complaining that the coffee was too cold. Instead of arguing, she simply smiled, apologized, and brought a new cup. Later, when the same man accidentally dropped his spoon, she rushed over again without hesitation. Her patience was endless. Watching her reminded him how far kindness could go, even in small acts. As the day went on, he started to talk to other workers, trying to learn what they knew about her. Most of them said she was always the first to arrive and the last to leave. Some mentioned that she never joined staff parties or dinners. One young waiter said he once offered her a ride home, but she refused politely, saying she didn't want to trouble anyone. No one really knew her story. She kept her life private, hidden behind her calm smile. The CEO began to see her as more than just a good worker. She was a mystery wrapped in quiet strength. And without realizing it, he started caring more than he should. A few days later, something unexpected happened. The restaurant received an important guest, a well-known food blogger who came unannounced. The staff panicked, trying to make everything perfect. The manager barked orders, cooks worked twice as fast, and waiters ran from table to table. Amid all the chaos, the undercover CEO accidentally spilled soup on his hand and burned himself slightly. It wasn't serious, but it stung. Before anyone noticed, she rushed over with a wet cloth. "You should be careful," she said gently, wrapping it around his wrist. "Hot soup is dangerous." He laughed softly, saying, "I guess I still have a lot to learn." "You'll get better," she said, smiling. "Everyone makes mistakes at first. What matters is that you don't give up." Her words stayed with him. He'd heard thousands of motivational quotes in boardrooms and conferences, but somehow, her simple words meant more. Maybe because they came from someone who actually lived them every day. That evening, after the dinner rush, he saw her sitting alone near the staff locker area. She was counting coins, probably her tips for the day, and writing something on a small piece of paper. When she noticed him, she quickly folded it and smiled. "Just noting down what I earned," she said shyly. "It helps me plan things." He nodded, pretending not to notice the worry in her eyes. She probably had bills to pay, groceries to buy, and maybe medicine for her mother. He wanted to help, but he couldn't reveal who he really was yet. If he told her he was the owner, everything would change. She might feel embarrassed or think he pitied her. He didn't want that. He wanted her to keep seeing him as just another co-worker. Later that night, when everyone was getting ready to leave, a sudden noise came from the kitchen. One of the dishwashers had dropped a heavy tray, and glass shattered all over the floor. She immediately rushed to help him clean, even though she was already exhausted. The CEO bent down to help too. As they picked up the pieces together, he looked at her and said quietly, "You always help everyone. Do you ever rest?" She laughed softly. "Maybe someday," she said. "But right now I can't afford to." Her voice was gentle, but those words hit him hard. He knew she wasn't just talking about money. She meant she couldn't afford to slow down, because if she did, everything she was holding together might fall apart. When the last piece of glass was thrown away, she stood up, wiped her hands, and gave that same quiet smile again. "Good night," she said, walking toward the door. He watched as she slipped the leftover bread into her purse one more time before leaving. He didn't stop her. He couldn't. Something inside him told him that what she was doing came from a place of love, not wrongdoing. That night, as he lay in bed, he thought about her words again. "I can't afford to." He wondered how many of his workers felt the same way, how many came to work every day smiling on the outside while carrying heavy burdens inside. For the first time, he realized how far he had been from the reality of his own company. The next morning, he arrived early and stood outside the restaurant, watching as she walked up the street, hair slightly messy from the wind, eyes still half asleep but ready to work again. He felt something shift inside him, a kind of admiration he hadn't felt for anyone in years. It wasn't just respect for her hard work. It was something softer, something that made his heart ache in a way he didn't fully understand yet. He promised himself silently that someday soon he would help her, but first he needed to know her full story, the reason behind her quiet strength and endless kindness. He didn't know that what he was about to discover would change everything, not just for her, but for him too, because sometimes a simple act, like hiding leftover bread in a purse, can uncover a truth far bigger than anyone expects. Days passed, but he couldn't get her out of his mind. Every time he looked at her, he saw strength hidden behind quiet eyes. She came to work early, helped everyone, smiled through exhaustion, and left long after everyone else had gone. To most people, she was just another hardworking waitress, but to him she was a mystery waiting to be understood. He knew she was hiding something, not in a bad way, but in the kind that comes from carrying too much alone. He kept remembering the small purse, the bread, and that little apartment where laughter and struggle lived together. He wanted to help, but he didn't know how without revealing who he really was. One evening, as the restaurant lights dimmed and customers trickled out, he decided to stay later than usual. He told the manager he would handle the closing shift with her, saying he needed to learn more about night cleanup. The manager didn't mind. By then, everyone believed he was just a simple trainee trying to do his best. The clock ticked past midnight. The restaurant was quiet except for the soft sound of plates being stacked and chairs being pushed in. She worked silently, lost in thought, wiping the same table twice without noticing. He finally spoke. "You look tired," he said gently. She smiled, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Tired is normal," she said. "It means I'm still moving." He wanted to ask more, but he held back. Instead, he said, "You know, most people would complain after working this late." She shrugged. "Complaining doesn't make things easier. It just makes the day longer." Her words hit him again, simple but full of truth. She carried wisdom that didn't come from books. It came from life itself. After cleaning, they stepped outside. The night was cold, the air heavy with the smell of rain. She wrapped her thin jacket tighter and looked down the street. "It's going to rain again," she said softly. He noticed her shoes were soaked from earlier puddles. Without thinking, he asked, "How far is your home?" She hesitated, looking unsure if she should answer. "Not too far," she finally said. "About 30 minutes if I walk fast." "That's quite far at this hour," he said. "You shouldn't walk alone this late." She smiled again, the kind of smile that hides more than it shows. "I've been doing it for years," she said. "Besides, it's not so bad when you get used to it." He wanted to offer her a ride, but he knew it would seem strange coming from a fellow worker. So instead, He watched as she waved goodbye and disappeared down the wet street. Something inside him wouldn't let him go home that night. He followed from a distance, keeping his steps quiet. The streetlights flickered weakly. Most shops were closed, and the only sounds were the rain and her footsteps splashing through shallow puddles. She walked faster near dark corners, holding her purse close. After about 20 minutes, she reached that same small apartment building. She looked around before unlocking the door, as if checking no one was watching. Then she went inside and the lights came on. From across the street, he could see her silhouette moving through the window. Soon after, the boy appeared again, running to her with open arms. She lifted him up despite her tired arms and kissed his forehead. Then the old woman came into view, wrapped in the same blanket as before. The waitress placed the bread on the table and sat with them, talking and laughing softly. This time, the CEO didn't just feel moved. He felt ashamed. He had built a business that employed hundreds, yet he had never really seen their lives beyond the walls of his restaurants. He had spent years believing that fair wages and good policies were enough. But now he realized for some, even the fairest paycheck wasn't enough to fight life's hardships. The next day, when he arrived for his shift, she greeted him with her usual kind smile. "Good morning," she said. He looked at her differently now. Every word she spoke carried a weight he hadn't noticed before. He couldn't stop thinking about the image of her family sharing bread in that dimly lit room. That day, something unexpected happened. The restaurant got busier than usual, and one of the kitchen workers called in sick. The manager was short-staffed and started shouting orders, frustrated. She stepped in immediately, offering to help in the kitchen even though it wasn't her job. She chopped vegetables, carried trays, washed dishes, anything that needed to be done. By the end of the night, she looked exhausted, her hands red from the hot water, her hair sticking to her face. But still, when the last customer left, she smiled and said, "At least everyone got fed today." He couldn't help but ask, "Why do you always push yourself so hard?" She looked down, drying her hands on a towel. "Because if I stop, things fall apart," she said quietly. He wanted to ask what things, but the look in her eyes stopped him. There was so much pain there, but also a strange peace, like she had already accepted her struggles as part of life. That night, he didn't follow her. Instead, he went home and sat in silence for a long time. He thought about all the times he had made decisions without knowing what people like her were going through. He thought about the policies, the numbers, the profit charts. All of it suddenly felt meaningless. What mattered were people like her, the ones who kept his company alive through hard work and quiet strength. The next morning, he made a decision. He would find a way to help her family, but first he wanted to hear the truth directly from her. Later that week, he arrived early and waited near the staff entrance. When she came in, he walked beside her. "Can I ask you something?" he said softly. "Sure," she replied. He hesitated before speaking. "The bread you take home, it's for your family, isn't it?" She froze for a moment, her face turning pale. "You saw that?" she asked quietly. He nodded. "Yes, but don't worry. I won't tell anyone." She looked down, her voice shaking slightly. "I didn't mean to steal. I only take what would be thrown away. My mother is sick and my little brother. He's still in school. I can't always afford extra food. I thought it wouldn't hurt anyone if I took what was left." He listened without interrupting, his heart heavy. She continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "Sometimes I feel ashamed, but then I think, what's worse, wasting food or letting them go hungry?" Tears filled her eyes, but she quickly wiped them away. "Please don't tell the manager. I'll stop if it's wrong. I just didn't know what else to do." He felt a lump in his throat. He wanted to tell her that it wasn't wrong, that she had done nothing but show love. But he couldn't reveal who he was, not yet. So instead, he said softly, "You're not in trouble. You did what you had to do." She looked surprised, then nodded slowly. "Thank you," she whispered. For the rest of the day, she worked quietly, maybe embarrassed that someone had seen her secret. He tried to act normal, but he couldn't stop thinking about her words. What's worse, wasting food or letting them go hungry? That night, after everyone left, he stood alone in the empty restaurant. The chairs were stacked, the lights dimmed, and the smell of bread lingered in the air. He looked around and thought about how much food they threw away each day. Food that could feed dozens of families like hers. It broke him inside. He decided then and there to change things. Not just for her, but for every employee struggling silently, But before he could act, he needed to tell her the truth, that he wasn't just a co-worker, but the man who owned the place she worked so hard to keep alive. He didn't know how she would react, or if she'd ever forgive him for hiding his identity. But one thing was clear. What started as a business mission had turned into something far more personal. He had gone undercover to find problems in his restaurant. Instead, he had found something far more powerful. A woman whose strength and kindness had opened his eyes to the real meaning of humanity. And deep inside, he knew that this was only the beginning of what was about to change, for both of them. The week after that quiet conversation felt different for both of them. She seemed more reserved, her usual smile smaller, her eyes more cautious. He noticed she avoided eye contact with him at first, probably afraid he might tell someone about the bread. He didn't blame her. He could only imagine how much courage it had taken for her to open up even a little. He wanted to ease her worries, but he also knew that revealing the truth, that he was the owner, needed the right time. It wasn't something he could just blurt out between shifts. He wanted her to understand why he had come there in the first place, and what he had learned because of her. A few days later, the regional managers planned to visit the restaurant for inspection. Everyone was stressed, running around, polishing cutlery, wiping windows, and fixing uniforms. She was working harder than anyone, trying to make sure everything looked perfect. Watching her command the floor so calmly made him realize how much natural leadership she had. She wasn't just a good worker. She was the kind of person who could lift everyone around her. When the managers arrived, he quietly stepped aside, pretending to be busy in the corner. They didn't recognize him in his plain uniform, and he preferred it that way for the moment. He watched them speak to the staff, giving orders, checking lists, talking about targets. He noticed the tension in everyone's faces. This was the kind of stress he had caused for years without realizing how heavy it felt for the people below him. The managers eventually left, satisfied with their visit. When it was over, the staff sighed with relief and started joking again. But he couldn't laugh. He was thinking about all the times he'd focused on profits and reports while forgetting the hearts behind those numbers. That night, he stayed long after closing, waiting for her to finish cleaning. When she finally turned around, surprised to see him still there, he said quietly, "Can we talk for a minute?" She hesitated, then nodded slowly. He led her to a quiet corner near the storage room where it was calm and away from everyone else. He took a deep breath. "I've been meaning to tell you something," he said. She looked nervous. "Is it about the bread again?" "No," he said softly. "It's about me." She frowned, unsure what he meant. "I haven't been honest with you," he continued. "I came here pretending to be a trainee, but that's not who I really am." She blinked, confused. "Then who are you?" He paused, then said, "I'm the owner of this restaurant. Actually, the whole chain." For a moment, she just stared at him. Then her eyes widened, her face draining of color. "You're the owner?" She whispered. He nodded. "Yes. I went undercover to see what really happens here. How the staff works, what they deal with every day. I wanted to see things from your side." She stepped back, slightly overwhelmed. "So all this time, you were watching us?" "In a way, yes," he said gently, "but not to judge anyone. I wanted to understand, and because of you, I did." Her hands trembled slightly. "You knew I was taking bread. You could have fired me." "I could have," he said. "But I didn't because I saw why you did it. I saw your family. I saw the kind of heart you have. You weren't stealing, you were surviving. You were helping others, not yourself." Tears welled up in her eyes, and she looked away. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I didn't mean to make trouble, I didn't know what else to do." He stepped closer, keeping his voice calm and kind. "You didn't do anything wrong. You've worked harder than anyone here. You've given more than anyone should have to give. I'm the one who should be sorry for not seeing the lives behind this business sooner." Her tears spilled over and she tried to wipe them quickly. "I never wanted pity," she said quietly. "I just wanted to keep my family safe." "I know," he said softly. "And that's exactly why I respect you so much." They stood in silence for a moment. The hum of the kitchen fridge was the only sound in the room. Then he said, "I want to help you. Not because I feel sorry for you, but because you deserve it. You've shown me what real strength looks like." She shook her head quickly. "You don't have to. I'm fine, really." "You're not," he said gently. "And that's okay. Let me do this, please." She hesitated, unsure if she should trust him, but something in his eyes, something honest and warm, made her nod slowly. The next day he called a staff meeting. Everyone gathered in the main dining area, confused about why the new trainee was suddenly standing in front of them next to the manager. Then, in front of everyone, he removed his name tag and said clearly, "My name is not what you've known me as. I'm the owner of this restaurant chain." The room went completely silent. You could hear a pin drop. Some of the workers gasped. Others exchanged surprised looks. The manager nearly dropped his clipboard. He continued, "I came here because I wanted to understand what it really means to work here. Not from an office, but from your side. I wanted to see what you go through every day. And what I've learned has changed me." He paused, his voice calm but full of feeling. "I've seen how hard you all work. I've seen how much you care about this place. But one person in particular reminded me what this company should stand for: kindness, patience, and heart." Everyone turned to look at her. She looked frozen in place, eyes wide, not sure what to do. "She doesn't know I'm going to say this," he said, glancing at her kindly. "But I want all of you to hear her story." She shook her head slightly, embarrassed, but he spoke gently. "She's been working here tirelessly, helping others even when she's struggling herself. She takes care of her sick mother and little brother alone. And yes, she took leftover bread home, but not for herself, for them. Food that would have gone to waste became hope for her family." The room stayed silent, but it wasn't judgmental silence, it was heavy with emotion. Some of the workers lowered their heads, a few wiped their eyes. "She reminded me," he continued, "that this restaurant isn't just about profit or reputation. It's about people. It's about families. It's about compassion. And I realize now that success means nothing if we forget that." He turned back to her. "You've taught me more in these few weeks than I've learned in years of business." Her eyes filled again and she shook her head softly. "I just did what I had to do," she whispered. "That's exactly what makes it so powerful," he said. Then he made an announcement that shocked everyone. "From today onward, we're creating a new fund to support any of our workers who face hardships. No one working here should have to hide their struggles or go hungry again." The staff broke into soft applause, many smiling through tears. Then he looked at her again and said, "And as for you, I want to offer you a new position. You'll be a shift manager here. You've already been leading with your heart. It's time that your title matches it." She covered her mouth in disbelief. "I don't know what to say," she murmured. "Just say you'll accept it," he said with a kind smile. The restaurant filled with applause again, and she stood there speechless, tears running down her cheeks. The workers gathered around, hugging her, congratulating her. It was one of those rare moments where everyone in the room felt connected, human and full of heart. Later that night, when everyone left, she found him sitting quietly near the same corner table where he'd first met her weeks ago. She walked over and said softly, "I don't know how to thank you." "You don't have to," he said. "You've already given me something I didn't even know I was missing." She sat down across from him, still wiping her eyes. "What's that?" He looked at her gently. "Perspective, humanity. You reminded me why I started this company in the first place, to make people feel cared for. Somewhere along the way I forgot that, but you brought it back." For the first time she smiled without holding back. "I'm just glad I could help." He nodded slowly. "You did more than help. You changed something in me." They sat quietly for a while, both tired but peaceful. Outside, the city lights flickered and the rain began again, tapping softly on the glass. That night, the restaurant didn't feel like just a workplace anymore. It felt like home. After that emotional day at the restaurant, things began to change slowly but surely. The mood of the staff lifted. The tension that once filled the air started to fade. People began to smile more, talk more kindly, and even the customers noticed the difference. There was something genuine in the air now, something that couldn't be bought with money. She stepped into her new role as shift manager with quiet confidence. At first she was nervous, worried the others might think she got the job only because of what happened, but the team respected her. They knew how hard she had worked, and they trusted her because she had always treated them as equals. He continued visiting the restaurant, though now everyone knew who he really was. But even after the big reveal, he didn't act like a boss. He still rolled up his sleeves, helped clean tables, refilled water glasses, and shared breaks with the staff. To him, this wasn't about checking performance anymore. It was about staying connected to the people who kept everything running. Some days, he'd find her sitting by herself during closing time, finishing paperwork or just resting after a long shift. He'd bring her a cup of tea and sit across from her, and they'd talk not about profits or plans, but about life. He learned more about her world, how she used to dream of becoming a teacher, how her mother's illness changed everything, how she had to drop out of college to take care of her family. She spoke softly, but every word carried strength. She wasn't bitter, just tired. Yet even in her weariness there was warmth. He found himself drawn to that warmth. It reminded him of something he'd lost years ago when business success became his only goal. Listening to her made him remember that behind every person's struggle, there was a story, one that deserved to be heard. One evening after the dinner rush, she was closing up when she saw him standing outside in the light rain, waiting by the door. She smiled and asked, "You're still here?" He shrugged lightly. "Couldn't leave without saying goodnight." She laughed softly. "You sound like you work here more than I do." "Maybe I just like the company," he said with a grin. They walked outside together, the rain gentle and cool. The street was quiet and the lights reflected off the wet pavement. She pulled her worn-out jacket tighter around her shoulders and he offered his umbrella. "I'm fine," she said. "You'll get wet," he smiled. "I don't mind." They walked side by side for a few blocks, their footsteps echoing softly. There was a calm between them, a kind of peace that didn't need words. When they reached her street, she turned and said, "Thank you for everything you've done." "You didn't have to, but you did." He shook his head. "You don't need to thank me. You helped me more than you know." She looked curious. "How?" He hesitated for a moment, searching for the right words. "Before I met you, I thought success was about numbers, awards, and expansion. But now I see it's about people, about heart. You showed me that. You reminded me what I lost along the way." Her eyes softened. "Maybe you just needed someone to remind you that you're human too." He smiled gently. "Maybe I did." From that night on, they spoke more often, sometimes about work, sometimes about life, sometimes about nothing at all. The conversations became something he looked forward to. She didn't treat him like an owner or a rich man. To her, he was just someone trying to understand, trying to be better. Weeks passed. The restaurant's new support fund started helping staff members who faced tough times. Medical bills, housing struggles, even tuition for their kids. The story spread across the company, inspiring other branches to do the same. It became a movement of kindness, all because of one small act. A waitress hiding leftover bread in her purse. One morning he arrived early and saw her sitting in a booth, writing something in a notebook. "What's that?" he asked as he slid into the seat across from her. She smiled shyly. "It's just a list of things I want to do. You know, when things get better." He leaned forward. "Like what?" She flipped a few pages and read softly. "Finish college. Help my brother go to school. Maybe start a community kitchen someday for people who can't afford meals." She closed the notebook quickly and laughed nervously. "It's silly, I know." He shook his head. "It's not silly at all. It's beautiful." She smiled faintly. "Maybe one day." "Maybe sooner than you think," he said quietly. She didn't know that he had already started thinking about how to make her dream real. A few weeks later, he called her into his office at the company headquarters, a simple room overlooking the city. She looked nervous when she walked in, but he greeted her with a calm smile. "Don't worry, this isn't about work. I just wanted to show you something." He handed her a folder. Inside were papers, permits, layout sketches, and a project proposal. She looked confused. "What is this?" "It's for the community kitchen," he said. "The one you talked about." Her eyes widened. "You remembered?" "Of course I did," he said softly. "We're going to build it together. You'll run it, train people, serve families who need help. The company will fund it, but it'll be yours to lead." She stared at him, speechless. Tears filled her eyes again, and she said, "Why are you doing this?" He took a deep breath. "Because you reminded me what real impact looks like. Because you made me believe in people again. And maybe because I care about you more than I expected to." Her eyes widened slightly. She didn't say anything at first. The room was quiet, filled with a soft, heavy silence. Then she whispered, "You don't have to feel sorry for me." He shook his head slowly. "It's not pity. It's something deeper. Something real." For the first time, she didn't look away. Their eyes met, and in that moment there was no boss or employee, no owner or waitress, just two people who had found each other in the most unexpected way. The months that followed were full of change. Together, they worked on the new kitchen, turning an old building near the city's edge into a warm, welcoming space where anyone could come for a meal. She poured her heart into it, painting walls, setting up tables, organizing food drives. He often showed up in casual clothes, helping serve food, washing dishes, or fixing shelves. The place became more than just a kitchen. It became a symbol of hope. People from the neighborhood came not just for food, but for comfort. It became a space where stories were shared, laughter returned, and kindness grew. Every evening after the work was done, she and he would sit outside on the steps, tired but happy. One evening, as the sun set in golden orange, she looked at him and said softly, "You changed my life." He smiled gently. "You changed mine first." She laughed a little, shaking her head. "I still can't believe everything that's happened. It feels like a dream." "Maybe it's not a dream," he said. "Maybe it's what happens when two people refuse to give up." There was a pause. The air was quiet, warm. Then she said, "You know, when you first came to the restaurant, I thought you were just another worker trying to get by." He laughed. "That's actually what I was trying to do, just in a different way." She smiled. "And now look at us." He nodded, looking out at the street ahead. "Yeah, look at us." A few weeks later, the community kitchen officially opened. Cameras, news reporters, and guests filled the small space, but the moment didn't belong to him. It belonged to her. She stood in front of everyone, speaking nervously but from the heart. "This place started with a simple act," she said, her voice shaking slightly. "I took leftover bread because I didn't want it to go to waste. I never thought that small moment would lead to something like this. It taught me that kindness can grow from the smallest seeds and that no one's story is too small to matter." People clapped and cheered, and he stood quietly in the back, watching her with pride. When her eyes found his, she smiled. Later that night, after everyone had gone, they sat again in the quiet kitchen. She looked at him and said, "You know what's funny? I used to think you were someone completely different," he chuckled. "I thought the same about you." They both laughed, then fell silent again, comfortable in the quiet. He looked at her and said softly, "You're the reason I found myself again." She smiled and said, "And you're the reason I started dreaming again." The lights dimmed, and the sound of the city drifted in from outside. They sat together, two lives that had crossed paths by chance, but perhaps it wasn't chance at all. Sometimes the smallest moments lead to the biggest changes. Sometimes one act of kindness opens the door to something much deeper. And for him, it wasn't just about discovering a story. It was about finding someone who reminded him what it truly meant to care. And maybe, just maybe, that was the moment he truly fell.